my video on now, and I trust you can all see Tara's screen. So yes, good morning everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. This will be our last online seminar for the year, and then we will resume our series in either late January or very early February. We've got lots of nice topics coming up, so we look forward to having those conversations with you next year. For today's session, we will be discussing COP27 and JETP. Tara will be taking us through what these terms mean, and we have two guest speakers with us. But before I introduce them, I'll just say good morning to Tara. She's the policy coordinator from SAFCEI, and as I mentioned, some of you may have seen her at the Learning Festival. She was there on one of the afternoons, and she was also in our session last week. So morning, Tara. Great. And then our other two guest speakers, one of them will be familiar to you. It's Wendy from Ubuntu Rural Women and Youth Forum, and the other guest speaker is Mandla Hadebe. And Mandla is somebody who I see a few times a week because their organization works in the same office as SCAT, but unfortunately he couldn't attend the building opening, so you wouldn't have seen him at that event. You may have seen his colleague Simon. So very warm welcome to our two guest speakers. They both attended COP27, shall I say, and they will be sharing some of their insights and what their takeaways were from that, from having attended the session in Egypt. So with that, I will hand over to Tara. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Claire. And yeah, welcome everyone to this seminar where we're going to be talking about COP and COP27 specifically. Last week we had a conversation on flood and disaster risk management from Mr. Nyambezi. And so this week we're taking it more to the international level. What happens at an international level, and why is COP something that we should be aware of and engaged with? So let's just start off with a brief overview on what COP27, or specifically what is COP. So COP stands for the Conference of Parties, and it's an annual conference. We've had 27 iterations of this conference, and basically it's a space where international governments and civil society organizations come together, and governments in particular negotiate and talk about what they're doing to tackle climate change. So they put forward money to help other governments tackle climate change. They put forward ideas. They talk about how they are reducing their emissions and talk about what their tangible actions have been in the past, since the last meeting. So at this point you might be wondering, okay, that's fair enough, interesting, maybe not, but why do we need international action on climate change? And essentially different countries emit different amounts of carbon dioxide, what has become known as the greenhouse gases. And currently China, US, and India are the biggest, but historically the UK, Europe, and the US have been the biggest emitters. So there are different levels of this concept of shared and differentiated responsibility comes up in the COP conversation, in that currently we have 3 countries that are the top emitters, but in the past there were other people who were responsible for emitting the largest amount of carbon. And that carbon that was emitted in the past is still there in the atmosphere, contributing to our current day climate change. So it's not as straightforward as deciding, okay, who is responsible for causing current day climate change, and therefore who should be taking all the action. So let's just remind ourselves, because we're talking about carbon emissions, what really is climate change, right? We know that we, in many parts of the world, burn coal, gas, and oil as forms of energy. And in this process, we release greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is the most common one of these. And that creates this film around the planet that traps the heat and causes a global rise in temperatures. And this global rise in temperatures causes an increase in extreme weather events. We have in flood-prone areas more increasing frequencies of floods. In drought-prone areas, we have more droughts happening. In general, there's a trend towards higher levels of heat. And as a result of that increased heat, we have glaciers and ice caps in the North Pole and the South Pole melting. And that water then goes into the sea, which causes the sea to increase in its height. So we have sea level rise. Specifically in South Africa or Southern Africa, we know that this climate climate crisis is causing crops to be more and more difficult to grow. Livestock is becoming more and more difficult to raise. And we know that because of the changes in temperature impacting our oceans, our fish stocks are also going to move. And these three things are going to become more and more severe unless we stop burning at a global level coal, gas, and oil. So remember what I was saying about how we have these three top emitters. So we have the US, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but the US, China, and India are the top three emitters. And South Africa is actually not so low in the global levels of emissions. And this is predominantly because of our reliance on coal for our energy system. Eskom not only is unreliable in providing accessible energy for everyone, it also uses coal predominantly to generate that energy. And so just for some stats, South Africa is the most carbon intensive economy globally. So we've got quite a small economy, but relative to the size of our economy, we emit the most carbon emissions for that size of an economy. And we are responsible for half of the emissions from the African continent. And the single most polluted point on Earth is in South Africa. And that is the Sasol Secunda plant, which uses coal and transforms coal into liquid fuel. And it's one of the most dirtiest emission intensive practices. It's been outlawed in many parts of the world, but South Africa continues to follow this. So tying back to COP and the whole idea of international negotiations and partnership and solidarity, in COP26, which happened last year in Glasgow, there was this partnership deal that came out of that. It was called the Just Energy Transition Partnership. And essentially what happened was that the UK, the USA, European Union, France, and Germany came together and said, okay, we will put forward $8.5 billion to South Africa to use to transition from coal and the coal-based energy system in a just manner. That money was mostly, and I'm sure our speakers are going to talk more about this today, but I'm just going to say that that money was mostly in the form of loans. Only 4% is in the form of grants. And what that means is that South Africa will be taking this money from international governments around the world, and we'll have to pay that money back with interest. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. Then this year, at COP27, which happened in Egypt in Sharm el-Sheikh, South Africa put forward an investment plan. And this investment plan was presented to international partners and highlighted three priority areas that it was going to focus on. And this was the electricity sector in the country, the establishment of a new electrical vehicles sector, which they've sort of highlighted they'll focus probably on establishing that in the Nelson Mandela Bay area, but it's unclear yet what the plans will be there. And then the third sector they want to focus on is the green hydrogen sector. And what this plan outlined was that this was what they were going to do with that initial 8.5 billion that was committed last year at COP26, but it also outlined that we need $1.5 trillion over the next 5 years if we really want to transition South Africa to be off coal completely. So this is an example of the kind of commitments and negotiations that happen in COP. There are many, many others that I haven't touched on. But the big sort of idea that when we're talking about COP and international action on climate change is that we have to remember that solidarity is really the only way we can get through the climate crisis. And the emissions that are coming from the US, from China, from South Africa, they are going into our atmosphere and impacting everyone. So all our actions are impacting everyone on the planet. And this picture here that you see is a picture from one of the small island developing states in the Pacific Ocean. The island is called Tuvalu. And the island is one of a number of different islands around the world that are going to be completely submerged by sea level rise. So there are 11,000 people who live on these islands. They have their own indigenous languages, indigenous cultures, indigenous traditions and ways of living, and that will be completely lost because of climate change. And they are like barely contributing in terms of their emissions to causing the climate crisis. So this then is where the conversation around what is climate justice and who should be receiving support at an international level for dealing with the impacts of climate change and this crisis that we're currently facing. So I'm going to wrap up now so that we have time to engage with our speakers, and we have a short video from Claire as well. But essentially, responding to climate change is more than just responding to disasters. Disasters are the one element of climate change. Having floods, having droughts, those are important parts of the climate crisis that we need to think about, but we also need to think about the long-term, everyday requirement to act on climate change and how we need to have sustained efforts going on for the next 100 to 200 years, and how do we inform our decision making to be responsive to climate change and preparing for the climate change impacts that we are expecting. We need to build solidarity across communities and country borders, and we need to definitely stop all fossil fuel use as soon as possible. And specifically in South Africa, we need to track and hold our government accountable for how it's transitioning away from coal, what's happening in that space, who's being affected, and how in particular is this money being spent. So I'm going to leave it there and hand over to Claire. And then we'll have some time after Claire's shared the video that talks a bit more specifically about COP27 this year. We'll then go into some conversations with both Wendy and Mandla about their particular experiences of COP. So I'll leave it there. Claire, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tara. That was a really great introduction. And I think you quite clearly laid out the importance of the conversations that we'll be having today and reflecting on COP. The video that I'm going to share now will have some repetition of what Tara said. And it also shows some scenes from COP, previous COPs, which I thought would be interesting to share with you to actually get a picture of what is the stage kind of the event look like, and then also just the importance of it. So I'm going to share my screen.
What you need to know about COP27. Since 1995, the United Nations has organized an annual conference for nearly 200 countries to talk about crisis. Delegates and ministers from these countries have butted heads to find ways to cut emissions and adapt to a warming planet. So what is it that delegates will talk about at the beach resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt this November? Get ready for some jargon. First, loss and damage. Under the Paris Agreement signed in 2015, rich countries promised to pay for losses and damages caused in poor countries by climate change. However, until now, countries have not discussed who will pay, how much they will pay, and how that money would be transferred. With a third of Pakistan underwater only a few months ago, the debate around loss and damage is expected to be a hot one at COP27. Second, what does Africa need? This will only be the 5th time a COP meeting has happened in Africa. As the continent that has contributed the least to climate change, but is suffering its worst impacts, there will be a much needed focus on Africa's needs. Those needs will be met through financial grants, technology partnerships, and bilateral deals. Expect lots of announcements that will be called Memorandum of Understanding. Third, is private capital moving as expected? Even though COP meetings have been traditionally about government officials meeting their counterparts, private companies have been playing a bigger and bigger role. That's because moving the world to reach net zero emissions within decades will require as much as $4 trillion of investments every year. The vast majority of that money will come from private players. At COP26 in Glasgow last year, the world's biggest financial institutions with more than $150 trillion of assets under management committed to moving their capital toward the goal of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. At COP27, there will be a big focus on finding out how they are progressing.
Okay, I'm going to cut it there. Great. So yeah, I hope that gave you a picture of what COP actually looks like. So for our next session, I'll be handing over to Tara to take us through the rest of the session.
Great, thanks so much for sharing that video, Claire. So now I'm going to hand over to Wendy. So Wendy will speak to us about her experience of COP. She was at Egypt, and then we'll move on to Mandla after that, and then we'll have some time for questions from all of you. And yeah, so I'll hand over to you, Wendy. And yeah, if you can turn on your video, great.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. When I received this phone call from Claire regarding this session coming together to speak about COP, I was really overwhelmed to think, where will I start? Because COP in itself is very overwhelming. It's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people coming together. And if I just look at one of the ways to adapt to climate change or reducing our carbon emissions, that would mean less flying. But yet we were flying in numbers. I mean, planes were arriving in Egypt every day, bringing thousands of people there. And I was just thinking, how much emissions are we actually how much carbon are we actually emitting in this period whilst we're flying to COP? So that for me would contradict the very reason for us going there. But we also know the only way for us coming together in this nature would be by flying. Alternatively, we would do COP on a Zoom like we are discussing now. And I was thinking, how will we set off those emissions, you know, whether it would be by planting spekboom or other ways, because we have contributed much to climate. Now, it was really an honor to go to Egypt because of Egypt historical history, and then also because of the beautiful sacred places in Egypt, like Mount Sinai. We were next to the Red Sea, you know, to put your feet in the clean, beautiful water where you can see the fish. It's so clean. And I was like, oh, there's no carbon here. There's no oil spilling in the ocean, or maybe there's no mining happening in the oceans of Egypt, whilst we have all of it in South Africa. So just arriving there was quite overwhelming. There was tons of buses waiting at the airport, and maybe that was better than having individual cars taking us to the different hotels and the venues where we stayed. And of course, the prices is escalated much. The prices for accommodation and transport and so forth. So that was my very first experience of Egypt. And you know, Egypt was a desert, and there's so much green there, so many trees, grass, and nature. It was just amazing to experience all the beautiful spaces and creation in Egypt. Whilst we know that it's a lot of dry land and there was a lot of water, and it's some of the things, you know, you go into a country, you don't know what to expect, but it was beyond my expectation of what Egypt would look like. Now, coming to COP in itself, there was a blue zone and a green zone, and I didn't have access to the blue zone in the first week because you need a special accreditation from the United Nations to attend the blue zone. So my first week, I had a lot of excursions in the green zone, a lot of talks by different environmental activists. We also had business there. There was a lot of pavilions where they had government pavilions. They had not in the blue COP they have country pavilions, but in the green COP they had government departments within Egypt were there only with all their exhibitions. We had protest art. We had students doing a sculpture of Mother Earth, and she had all these ropes and everything around her, and I didn't even know it represents, but when I saw the picture, I just thought that's his Mother Earth with all the the heavy burdens she's currently carrying, with everything that's going on and all the emissions and greenhouse gases, you know, that's been released that contributes to all the floods and global warming and the extreme heat and everything that we're seeing. And Indonesia, just not too long ago, there was an earthquake, I think about 3 weeks just after returning from Egypt. So that sculpture actually just in that protest art showed us what the reality is. And I saw paintings of a boy walking on earth, and he had like a mask, not a mask, you know, to get oxygen. Like when you go onto the moon, you need oxygen and all of that. He was walking with it on Earth. And what the protest art was bringing out is that if we don't reduce or keep, you know, make sure that we protect our ozone layer and that we reduce our carbon emissions, and so that the Earth don't become hotter, that's going to be the result, because that's what the protest art bring out. You know, what quality of the air we breathe in, what quality of air will the young generations and the generations to come breathe in if we don't get it right now. Yes, and there was a lot of things to see. There was electric cars on there, people speaking about going solar. I saw how they do biogas with waste, and there's projects going like that, and they call it green oil and all the alternatives to toxic energy sources. So there was a lot of that. And then I was at talks where they looked at adaptation, and also where they looked at greening the Suez Canal, where all the vessels that pass via the Suez Canal by 2030, all the vessels will be green. And it would mean that using solar power, even just to go along, no diesel, no electricity, and so forth. And I was like, how are they going to implement it? So there's a lot of talk and a lot of we're going to do this and we're going to do that. I know that from COP21 to COP26, that's 26 years where there was COPs every year. And if I look back and at decisions made now and what was promised long then, and with Paris agreements and other things, very little have actually been achieved. And I'm not sure if it's Claire or Tara that was saying that there was a lot of questions on the loss and damages and who's going to pay and where's the money going to come from and all of that. I mean, at this COP specifically, there was a lot of calls for reparations. if I just look at the South African context, and I was, when I finally made it to the green zone, I could visit the country pavilion. South Africa had their very own pavilion. All the countries had pavilions. And I think that depending on the amount of money you put in, the bigger your pavilion at COP as well. And it was so scattered. You know, I had to walk from this place to the other, from the one side to the other, to look at, you know, where's civil society, where's the youth voices, where's the children voices. I found civil society somewhere in a corner. And then we were at a justice pavilion, because I was supported by the Civil Society Fund and We Act, and they based in the USA to attend COP27. And we were from various countries. I was the only one from the pavilion, the Justice Pavilion, from South Africa. There was a lot of people from Puerto Rico, from the USA, different parts of the USA and some other countries as well. And we are a massive group. But there was also other groups. I saw Makoma there. And I saw other activists from South African organizations who work against coal or works against nuclear. I saw, I can't even remember all the names. There was the guy from the South African Council of Churches. He was also there, and we met through other SAFCEI events before and learning festivals and things we did at the time, Kosiamo and others, yes. And I also saw, the women in climate change, and they were also there. But there were no coherent strategies in us coming together and strategizing and even having protest and visibility at COP27. Now that for me was missing. If I look at South Africa history and protesting and people raising their voices against oil and gas drilling in the ocean, I mean, we've been doing it here. There's a lot of protests against new coal mining and the nuclear, no extension of the nuclear plant. But that side, there was nothing. So the South African delegation, doesn't matter who you went with, there was no coming together of us even deliberating how we gonna speak together as one voice at COP. And it was because I think it was designed in that way that people and the pavilions were so scattered from one another that it was by chance that we walk into one another. So then I could go and listen to some presentations by Makoma and Tabu and others that they did. But they didn't even know that I was also there doing presentations with people from the US and Puerto Rico and other countries, indigenous communities, people fighting for land justice, people fighting for climate justice, and us having a panel in terms of our very own strategies to look at mitigation and adaptation for climate change, but also what we think should happen in terms of reducing our climate emissions. And what was very significant when in preparation for my presentation, I did a lot of research, and I also came across the fact that South Africa is the 14th biggest polluter of climate, of greenhouse gases in the world. And then in terms of Africa, it's 4%. Africa contributes 4%, and South Africa, half of that. And I think Tara also mentioned that. 4%, but yet Africa is feeling the brunt of climate change. If you just look and see what is happening in terms of the flooding and a lot of the things that we are seeing, and the extreme drought, if you go to Eastern Cape and the Northern Cape, where they want to frack, and where they're dumping low-level waste, and where there's lots of mining happening, and even mining companies closing down. You see how hot in the Northern Cape, people get rain maybe every 3 years. Their livestock are dying. So there's a reality. So people are feeling it. But to hear that South Africa is the biggest, or to read or to research and find out that South Africa is the biggest polluter in Africa, that was very shocking for me to know. And that 77% reliance on coal. I mean, that was something that I thought is really significant. And we're speaking about reparations. Yes, reparations from the US and in the UK and all these countries that benefited from mining corporations in South Africa. And also reparations, you know, we've got even local mining companies, and they're just taking they taking minerals and things, they damaging nature, they temper with Mother Nature, and they just damaging the ecosystem. So if we don't press hard on this issue and really kind of come together as a stronger voice to get reparations, you know, I'm not sure if it's going to happen. And I think what's also happening at COP is that when this, you know, for decisions to be made, there must be consensus and people must agree to these things. But the biggest polluters of climate change, the oil and gas companies, a lot of them were sponsors of government. I saw the names on the pavilions who's sponsoring these events. And, you know, we're taking money to go to COP27, but there's no commitment from these big polluters to really reduce the pollution. Because it's about money, it's about greed, and that is quite problematic for us. And that is some of the things that I really thought that we should look at. The next COP will be in Dubai, as I understood. And I'm like, yes, you know, when COP27 happened, it's about the climate, and there's a lot of talks and things like that. But, you know, I'm unsure unless there's a mass civil disobedience. I'm not sure how much will be changed by the next COP. We don't, you know, there's a lot of lip service and people putting jam around your mouth. And then we're so happy. People were happy now to hear about this contribution for this grant that we're going to get, and South Africa's just energy transition plan, and so forth. But when I also read up a bit about it, I learned that South Africa would need 1.5 trillion rand. That is what it would cost for the transition. And the grant that we're going to receive from the UK and France and everybody that promised, it's 4% of that 1.5 trillion that we need. Now, where is the 96% going to come from? And I think Tara also mentioned that it's going to come from loans. Now we know that South Africa is already indebted. When we signed onto World Trade Organization and the IMF with our transition into a new democracy, apartheid debt that we're still paying. There's the almost nuclear debt that we wanted to make of 1 trillion rand, money that we don't have. You know, who's going to pay this debt? It's the generations to come that's going to pay this price, because we know a debt, it's not only the interest rate, it's the compromises that we have to make when we go into these debt. We've seen with economic partnership agreements, what happened with countries that had to cut their essential services and a lot of things, because there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of things that we have to do in privatizing essential sectors. We always have to give something away in return for something that they call good. You know, a loan is not even something to celebrate. The debt that they want to put us in with all the interest rate is nothing to celebrate. So we can't be glad about that. The grant that they're giving, that 4%, they should actually 100% finance with the mining corporations that's been benefiting from the wealth in the country, and that's been benefiting, and they are rich today on hardships of people. It's our communities that sits, and what I also mentioned, that it's the women that bear the brunt of climate change when I spoke, and so forth. It's our communities, it's the poor communities in South Africa who has nothing to do with the mining that's going on here. They didn't even benefit. But they sit with the health hazards. They sit with the mine TB. They sit with all the effects that's happening. Jagterskraal 2 months ago, when the mine dam collapsed, people knew about it. Where's the environmental impact assessment reports? You know, we always also know with these stuff, there's a lot of corruption. So there's not real monitoring of these things and what is happening with mining in the country as well. So I really think that we must do much more than just a talk. And when the COPs are happening, we've got all our press releases going out, and we want this and we want this and we want that. But it doesn't realize in terms of the real work on the ground and the masses rising, like the masses rising against apartheid and certain phases in South Africa. You know, I think that level of organizing is needed. I don't just want to go to another COP and just talk and share the hardships of people that we work with, and it doesn't translate in any good tangible thing, you know. So that is kind of the things that I would really want us to look into as organization. But in terms of the going more for electrical cars instead of cars fueled by oil and so forth. So that is something that we say, you know, might reduce the climate, investment into green hydrogen. This is the things they said, the electrical vehicle sector, renewable energy. We speak a lot about renewable energy, but we've got a wrong minister at the helm of electricity, Gwedi Mantasi, because when people, when he went, then the people say no to mining, or even in the West Coast, he say people are against development. And it's not that, because a lot of these ministers have a stake in the pie, because they've got shares into they've got shares in these mining corporations. Yeah. But the one thing that was really good for me was the networking and building new networks with people from across the world, people that are doing important climate change work on the ground. And so forth, and that is, I think the networking must expand, more exchanges between local organizations dealing with climate change in their own ways, and the opposing oil and gas exploration. There's hundreds of mining applications currently in the West Coast that we are resisting with the women of the West Coast, the same for Northern Cape. But what is the alternatives? The women say no to mining, but there's still high levels of unemployment. People are poor, they don't have income, they don't have jobs. So we need to look at alternatives, and currently that's what we kind of, the women are kind of redefining. So if we say no to the mine, you know, how do we look after ourselves and our families? How do we build sustainable livelihoods? And I think that some of the things I would, you know, for me, that's actually more core work, the work with the women, and also looking at their own ways of building resilience to climate change, a word that many people say they don't even like, you know, because the burden is passed on the women and on the poor and on indigenous communities and landless communities, whilst they are not the problem, whilst they are not the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. So there's a fundamental line there, and there's a lot of inequality between the rich countries and the poor countries. We are at the receiving end, and we don't have much bargaining power. And I think that's why the masses, we need to hold these companies out. And even if our government say yes and sell us out, it's going to be in our hands to make sure that we don't allow any more mining or more oil and gas drilling and so forth in our country. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for that contribution, Wendy. I think you raised some really important points around the hypocrisy of COP, and this whole lack of coordination, which I think is one of the big issues that comes up. And yeah, the fact that South Africa is responsible for half of the emissions of the African continent through Eskom, and yet Eskom is not even able to provide reliable access to energy. And yeah, important conversations to be had around mining and resisting mining, and resisting the expansion of gas and coal mining in particular. So on that note, I think I will hand over to Mandla to give his contributions on his experience of COP, and maybe he can also talk about yeah, these issues that have been raised.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's 10 minutes before afternoon, and I am so thrilled to be in this conversation, really. Wendy, you were so passionate about what you said and your experiences at COP. And fortunately, you covered quite a few of my own experiences, so I don't have to repeat what happens and what happened at COP. But I think, Tara, you set a very good context of what the COP is supposed to be about and why people keep going to COP and keep hoping for whatever different results will come out of there. And Claire, thank you for part of the introduction. I think I should start from there. My name is Mandla. I work for the Economic Justice Network, which is a part of the Fellowship of Christian Councils in Southern Africa. What that means is that the fellowship is the umbrella of all churches in the SADC region. And they created an organization called Economic Justice Network to look at economic justice issues, how communities that work with the churches are impacted by the different economic systems. And lately we've been working on mining. So Wendy's last bit about, opposing mining and saying no to mining interests us quite a lot. What Claire didn't mention is that when we do meet, which is quite often in the passages of our building, we talk a lot about the different things that we do. And one of the things that Economic Justice Network does is host a platform that brings together communities that are affected and impacted by mining. We talk a lot about what happens, the rights that are abused when mining takes place, and how to seek remedy for some of those communities. We bring together a cross-section of professionals and practitioners that offer different solutions. And we've been doing this for the last 13 years here in Cape Town, where also annually mining companies and our governments and all sorts of people meet to divide up the profits of mining and how to further exploit vulnerable communities and so on. So we decided that we would pitch our own tent at their doorstep, and we would bring up conversations, uncomfortable conversations for mining companies on how to look at different aspects of the mining value chain. So in our conversation, we have arrived at a common spot where everyone else has arrived, and we are now talking about the just energy transition, what it means for ordinary people, and what it means specifically for those that live and are inconvenienced by mining. So my talk is not so much a lecture or anything, it's just a contribution to the ongoing conversation. And I want to say, I've been to, I've lost count how many COPs I've attended, but it all started in Durban when we hosted our own African COP, and we thought it was we thought we'd label it our World Cup, because it happened just after the South Africa hosted the World Cup. So we were able to be host to civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, and a whole bunch of well-meaning individuals from across the world who wanted to come and influence what goes on when these discussions take place. So let me start by saying we all acknowledge, and I think Tara said it, climate change is accelerating the need for a just transition. This is a shift from fossil fuels to what is now termed a green economy, and it's gradually taking place on the African continent with or without our accent or our acknowledgement. It is going to take place, and it is going to overtake any of the mobilizations and activities and things that we've been doing. This has all been decided. It's in part towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and in part it's what was agreed at the Paris Climate Change Agreement, which we all know took place in 2015, and which we had worked so feverishly towards after Durban. So what has happened, though, is that the narratives on energy transition have gained so much momentum and introduced too many definitions. It's now a buzzword. It means nothing now. You can say it as a sneeze, or you can shout it from the highest mountain, just energy transition or just transition, but it doesn't mean anything anymore, especially to its potential ramifications on the communities that require the transformation the most, or that are going to be affected the most by the transition. We've already acknowledged, and Wendy was saying just now, that we contribute, what, 4% towards the emissions, but we are hammered the most by what is happening, the effects of climate change. So the climate crisis is growing in intensity. It is, and it's time critical. We are losing time. The sooner we get to being in control of the emissions and of the rise in climate temperatures, the better for us. But the impact of climate change is still disproportionately high among African countries, even though we are the lowest emitters. Also, we're talking figures just now. Wendy was mentioning the Just Energy Transition Partnership. So Africa is going to need and is spending a substantial amount of resources to cope with the effects of climate change. And to we know already, because we've been impacted by other crises. We were hit by COVID, we were being hit by all sorts of other crises. There's this issue now in Russia and Ukraine. Even though it's so far away, it's impacting on our on the price of our food and energy and things like that. So we are being hit by multiple crises, and we are going to suffer. And our governments are going to continue to divert the little resources that we have to deal with these crises. And we are digging deeper and deeper into poverty. We're being told that transitioning to renewable energy is the most obvious solution for us and to the rest of the world. Now, the question is, and that's what we should focus on, can Southern Africa, and specifically South Africa, make this shift, and at what cost? We are already suffering, as I said, from an immense energy poverty. Most communities don't have access to energy besides traditional sources. And we know that energy's access is critical, especially to enable women in Africa to have fulfilling lives, and those who already bear the brunt of multiple burdens. So everywhere you go, this talk of that the just energy transition will provide and guarantee better and decent jobs, social protection, more training opportunities, and security for all. It sounds like, you know, something that we should quickly jump into and agree to. But again, as Wendy has pointed out, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of resources, $1.5 trillion to put it into perspective. So the transition to 100% renewable energy is urgent and is needed right away to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement and increase the chance of keeping global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. But the technologies are now the most competitive technologies for new installation. The investment in new technology, new renewable energy infrastructure has doubled that of new energy investment in fossil fuels and nuclear. So there's this rush towards a renewable energy because it's what we need. But we now need to focus on how to achieve this sustainably. So the new technologies that are needed for energy technologies, electric vehicles, and battery storage. By the way, South Africa has already pointed out that its 8.5 billion windfall is going to go towards electric vehicles and energy technologies. There's no mention of investing in new other technologies in agriculture, for instance, in skills improvement for people that are going to be affected when we stop the coal mines, when we start working on, when you have to decommission the coal mines, the communities and people that are downstream of that industry, how are they going to be absorbed into a new economy? So the supply chains for these materials will need to be appropriately managed to avoid creating new adverse social and environmental impacts along the supply chain. So I mentioned that we work with this platform on mining, and it has shown us along the mining value chain that there are so many injustices that still need to be corrected. And here we are going to be exploiting new minerals that are needed to enter into the new renewable energy technologies. It means before we address the past injustices, before we get reparations from the past injustices, we are going to be starting a new cycle of grievances. We are going to be starting a new cycle of dehumanizing people that live along mining value chains. All in the hope that we will arrive at an optimal renewable energy era. So for the just transition process to be effective, the focus has to be on the process of training the workforce, improving the livelihoods of local communities, other community level stakeholders, supporting human rights, as well as plans that develop a common agenda for all parties. This is, these are the texts that we are coming across, the narratives that are telling us that this just transition is what we must all work towards blindly. Put our energies behind this just energy transition partnership. And, we are being blinkered again into believing that somehow all these new ideas that are being thrown on the table are going to take us to the space we need to be. We know that the new minerals, the rare earth minerals, the copper, cobalt, nickel, rare earths, lithium, and silver, most of those, and zinc, are found in Africa, in exactly the same place where we have seen the exploitation of other minerals for the last 200 years, and where, again, we are going to be inflicting harm on these communities, as well as on the ecosystems that they live in, as well as on the environment. And we're just starting the cycle again. So it's very exciting to look forward to new and renewable technologies. I'm not going to go so much into the Just Energy Transition Partnership because I think both Wendy and Tara covered the money aspect, who's involved, who the IPG partners are, and how many billions they are hoping to pump into this. I will quickly jump to the COP itself, and I think Wendy captured the atmosphere. You had something like 46,000 or more people converged in one space, all trying to make sense of texts which cover different aspects of our ambitions, how we see the 27th COP shaping our ambitions as Africans, especially, and how we think that the world is remotely interested in listening to our screams. And imagine if you lived on these small island nations and every day you saw your country, your neighborhood sinking deeper and deeper underwater, and the rest of the world keeps pumping oil and gas, which we know are responsible for this. So I think Wendy covered quite extensively how we should look at our participation in the COP, starting from preparations when we are getting ready to go to COP. What is it that we are hoping to see? What is it that we are hoping to say there? How do we mobilize and how do we get solidarity among our people? And what kind of influence do we hope to push while we are at the COP itself? I mean, she also covered, I think, or she left out the part about the costs of travel, of accommodation. Actually, the government of Egypt decided that this was an opportunity for them to line their pockets or to cover the fiscal deficit by pushing the cost of everything from accommodation to flights to anything that you consume while you're in Sharm el-Sheikh. It was really ridiculous. And I think this happens in quite a few other countries that host as well. So it means that before you travel, you have to think seriously about what it is that you as an individual or your organization or your network are going to contribute once you get to the COP. The solidarity, who are you going to link arms with once you get there? And Wendy said she felt alone. She was not connected to anybody. I know Hosiami as well. I hung out with him a couple of days. And we also realized that no matter how much time we hung out at the South African pavilion, we could not find comradeship there for the causes that we're after. There were a lot of business people. There were a lot of business lobbyists, people that are profiting from fossil fuels, that are looking for opportunities to invest more, that were skulking around that area. So we felt like an island of goodwill, you know, looking around for people that we could hang out with. So we should start our mobilization at home. We should start, for instance, and use this Just Energy Transition Partnership as an anchor to start our mobilization towards COP28 if we are going to go there, or if we are going to make noise from here. I wanted to make it a point, that it's not necessarily the going to the COP that's going to achieve your goals. You can try and meet your the embassies of some of the countries that are involved. They are all here in our country already, in our different countries. So we can take that noise, that toy, and go to the embassies. But it's always politer to make appointments and try and push our points from there. Last, let me just say that I joined arms with a group of African civil society organizations who were very disappointed by the outcome. We followed each and every thread that was coming out of the COP. We were trying to use a checklist to say if the talks are going to achieve the cutting of greenhouse gases, if we are going to adopt sufficiently ambitious and binding global greenhouse gas emissions reduction. We wanted to see if the transition was going to be graceful, to ensure that it's going to be a job-rich, just transition from carbon-addicted economies. We wanted to make sure that there's a redress of social injustices that would empower oppressed constituencies. We wanted to make sure that the new technologies would manage green technology as a global public good to allow dissemination of climate-friendly technologies and localized production techniques. We wanted to make sure that the decarbonization would leave fossil fuels underground to compel owners or managers of oil, gas, and coal reserves to seize new exploration. We wanted also to ensure that the finance for planetary and survival of social survival, to apply carbon taxation and pricing, judicious pricing, to dispense with failed emissions trading and offset gimmickry. There's a lot of technical language that is involved at the COP, but if you uncover it, if you peel through some of it, you will find the little that drives our ambitions. So in short, we have to be better organized next time when we go and attend COP. We can build up to COP around the different things that we know, such as the Just Energy Transition Partnership. We just need to be more organized, and it also speaks to this gathering. I'm so sorry that I've not been able to join you before, but it looks like this is where we could have started to build up some of the momentum which we could have taken to Egypt. Thanks, and sorry for going over time, Tara.
Thank you so much for those contributions. I think it's really yeah, I think both you and Wendy highlighted this kind of the hypocrisy of COP when it comes to the dominance of fossil fuel companies in that space. And I think one of the things that also was coming out of COP was the fact that our African leaders are really trying to use COP almost as a way to sell gas to Europe in the light of this energy crisis that Europe is going through as a result of the Ukraine and Russia war. So that's another element. But as many of you, for those of you who are coming into this conversation around COP will be gathering, it's such a big event. There's so many different elements to it, so many different layers. If you're going into that space as a civil society organization, as Wendy highlighted, it's really important for networking and for building solidarity and having an international stage to bring your issues to an international audience and bring in those conversations. So I think what we're going to do now is see if any of you have some thoughts, some reflections, some questions perhaps to our speakers. And we're just gonna see what our audience here today has to say. What are your, like, how have you found our presentations? Did you have any things that you would want to clarify? Let's give you all a few minutes to think, and then let's see if there are any questions, and and then we'll take it from there. And I also know that it takes some time to process. There's been a lot of information that's been put forward. So it's also okay if you don't yet have formulated questions. So if that is the case, what I might do is, and if you would want to make a contribution, then please raise your hand. But also, otherwise, if you don't feel like raising your hands, feel free to unmute yourself and say that you have something to contribute.
It's not easy to raise a hand.
Yeah, I know for some it's not so easy to find the button to raise your hand. So if you don't find it, then just go ahead.
May I?
Yes, go for it.
Thank you very much. I don't know, it's not easy because of the big fingers, or maybe the buttons just get to disappear. Thank you again for the contributions from the speakers. You know, what is intriguing is to hear how South Africa's role is so significant in these international platforms. But I'm also just curious to hear how other African countries, maybe Southern Africa, are engaging, or what their view is in terms of what is South Africa's expected role in terms of this climate change. I ask this because, for example, the use of coal to generate electricity is also linked to South Africa's supply of electricity in the countries, to the countries in the region. And sometimes this just transition that we are talking about, insofar as this impacts South Africa, it has got these elements that will also affect countries in Southern Africa. Are there any views that have been expressed in terms of what South Africa's role should be coming from countries in the Southern Africa region in particular? Thank you.
So I'm not sure between Mandla and Wendy, which of you feel like you can answer that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone can answer that. But thanks all the same for the question, Gosikuli. I think you'll find that South Africa plays a leading role in the region for two reasons. One, the size of South Africa. Oh gosh, let me put. Okay, the size of South Africa's economy dictates that it takes a natural leadership position in the region. One. Two, South Africa has membership of various other networks and blocks like BRICS, for instance, which we know brings together, well, BRICS is what it is, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and Brazil. So that's an alternative economic bloc to that which of the World Bank and IMF influence. So South Africa naturally takes that position on behalf of all of Africa who use it as a gateway into that network. We know that the BRICS has the New Development Bank, which is supposed to counter again the IMF and World Bank, which means in essence, South Africa is a doorway to quite a bit of money that the rest of the region might need. You rightfully point out that South Africa is in a power pool with other countries in the SADC. They share electricity, they put it together and they draw from it as per their needs. And obviously South Africa's needs are much bigger because of the size of the industries and the size of the mines and so on. So I would say that in whatever discussions, bilateral or other multilateral that take place, South Africa is always going to take a leadership role, and it will lead the pace of any direction that any of these groups of countries might take. South Africa is also a member of the G20, which are the 20 most powerful economies in the world. And again, that speaks for itself that naturally, South Africa is going to be the voice of other African countries in those kind of spaces. And that is where you derive some of the resources and funding that drives the economies of our region. So in whichever case, South Africa is going to take a leading position and the other countries will follow. We know that besides, if we talk about the SADC region, besides South Africa, well, South Africa gets its water from Lesotho and so on and so forth. Then there's the Kariba Dam where there's hydroelectric power from Zambia and Zimbabwe. So there's very little electricity generation that comes into this pool. Most of it comes from South Africa's coal mines and power stations and so forth. So obviously, South Africa will dictate whatever discussions happen in that region. So this is just from looking at it from above and seeing what the power dynamics are in the region. I haven't seen any specific bilateral agreements between South Africa and any other country that talks about energy and so forth. So South Africa did say it would buy some excess energy offered by Zambia, but I doubt that Zambia has got more. Everybody's in a power bind, as far as I can see, an energy bind. So yeah, let me stop there before I ramble.
Yeah, it's interesting also on this point also to, at the moment, I think Zimbabwe just recently announced that it will be shifting or disconnecting large portions of the country in order, because they don't have enough electricity, hydro, the water source that they usually use to generate electricity is too low, so they can't produce enough energy, and they are going to be disconnecting different portions under the assumption that they will transition to solar. But yeah, so when we talk about energy crisis in Southern Africa, it's not just South Africa that is in that state. But I think it seems like we don't have any more questions from the audience. So I have a question for the two of you, which is, I mean, this project that we're in, it's the Rural Action for Climate Resilience, and the focus is rural. So what would you say if you had to say like a few, maybe give us one, if at most 2 points that you think would be relevant from a rural perspective to take out of COP, and in particular COP27? What would you say are the most important factors? Yeah, difficult question, I know, but maybe Wendy, we can start with you, seeing as Mandla took the last question, and then we can go to Mandla, if that's okay with you.
Yes, it's fine with me. I think one of the key things for me was around the investment in renewable energy and decentralizing energy distribution. I think for rural people, you will know that in the rural communities, there are people that are even without any electricity or without any energy. And renewable energy is really the way to it's gonna, we were talking about creating renewable energy cooperatives where communities own energy production. So by government saying that there will be some transition and they're open to renewables and money will be put towards that, it's opportunity to empower rural communities to own their their energy source as well. It can create jobs for the community, and people will have access, and they can also make a living of it. That's what we see as one positive thing that came out. They didn't speak about renewable cooperatives and stuff like that. That's our dream, but I'm referring to the commitment to invest in renewable energy. So that's something that we, and then around adaptation. There was some talks on adaptation, but I didn't hear much from government's point of view of adaptation. It was more businesses and us kind of saying what is our needs, what we would see as ways of adapting to climate change and so forth. And our view is to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, and the issue around sustainable transport. Maybe more bicycles like they do in many countries where there's less cars on the road and more bicycles, or like more centralized transport systems and so forth. South Africa speak about that as well. A better transport system, I think that will reduce our carbon emissions as well. And then the issue around the reduction of course, fossil fuels. We speak about it all the time, and the electric, going for more, for electric vehicles, a vehicle fleet. But I was just in a workshop this whole week, and we were saying, so if they change the car from being like with the use of fossil fuels, and now
Wendy, something has happened. I don't know if it's just me, but something has happened to your audio. It just suddenly became a bit muted. Maybe, I don't know if you can come closer to your microphone.
Okay, I am at the microphone. I actually have the laptop in my hand. I was just moving a bit, yes. Yeah, so I was saying in terms of in terms of the vehicle system that we use, one of the three things that we're going to change, one of it was about our transport system. And I'm saying that is something good for us. The rural people don't use cars, most of them. They have to hitchhike or they use public transport systems, but there's nothing really happening. Rural people have to wait long hours against the road to get some form of transport. So if that transport system can also look in capacitating rural communities, or getting bus stations like in Cape Town, where you just get on a bus and you go to the next place, to the next place, to the next place. If we can have similar transport system for rural communities,
it will really alleviate the issue of access as well. Access to transport to go to places. The food is expensive because of transport, because of high prices. But the centralized transport system, not too many vehicles on the road, for instance. Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm just out of my head now. That's what I can think now for rural communities, and to use the energy sources that will create jobs as well. Energy sources that will not be harmful to the environment, and then energy sources that will supplement people's income, where people can create jobs and sustainable livelihoods. Yeah, I think that's the two for me for now.
Thanks so much for that. Mandla, do you want to come in?
I think, again, Wendy just covered almost everything, but I agree with her that this is the time now for rural communities to look at alternative livelihoods. Okay, so we need to look at what these renewables mean. I mean, I know that in my at the beginning I said that we already have a problem of energy poverty, that rural communities are not plugged into the energy sources. But we now already need to start looking at how we can use these renewables to diversify our livelihoods. As the energy transition conversation grows, we also need to look at sources of finance. We now need, as rural communities, to look where the finances can be arrived at. There are so many different funds that have been set up that can be used for different activities. The adaptation fund, the loss and damage fund that was introduced. We need to plug into those projects and see how we can diversify our livelihoods in rural areas before all these electric cars and things come up that are going to overtake our current knowledge. So we also need to build knowledge around what are other alternative livelihoods. Can we go into tourism instead? Can we look at using renewable energy to do farming for irrigation purposes, for storage of our products? You know, we need to look at the bigger picture as rural communities before we are overtaken by the new technologies. And I think we also need to find a way of inserting our voice into these COPs. Wendy was speaking about the green zone, where there were different types of technologies that were being showcased from different countries. We need to tap into that knowledge for our own adaptation. We need to adopt some of that technology for our own constituencies. So we need to really insert our voice, first of all, to ensure that those that are representing us, for instance, we had a conversation with the chairperson of the Africa Group of Negotiators. We had a one-on-one with this person, and we said, you are representing the 58 or so African countries that are represented in the COPs. What are the conversations you are having? What are the things that you are talking about that affect us as ordinary people? How can we help? And he was of the opinion that if we make enough noises in the corridors, if we hold up placards in strategic places and so on, we can encourage them, because they are also outnumbered. Our negotiators are going in there and facing off with hundreds and hundreds of professionals from America and Europe who are out to make sure that they give as little as possible to Africa. So we need to encourage our negotiators. We need to get them to get to know them here in our country, here where we have access to them, and start talking to them before they go there, and tell them what we feel as communities, so that they know the true feelings, and they know the faces of these struggles that we face. Yeah.
Great. Thanks to both of you for those valuable contributions. Yeah, I just want to also highlight again, the Just Energy Transition Partnership that came out of COP27 for South Africa. I mean, I think this is, if it does, it should, you know, shape the energy landscape in South Africa. It will in particular impact those in Mpumalanga, but might also impact those in the Northern Cape, and in areas that they identify as important for renewable energy generation. And the government has put out this investment plan, and it's open for comment until I think mid-February, which is not very long. So it is important that we're all aware of it and start to think about how is this energy plan, this Just Energy Transition investment plan going to impact all of us. And we need to start understanding the implications of that moving forward, because yeah, it's a significant, it's going to be a significant part of our future, I think. So with that being said, I just want to double check whether there are any more questions from the audience, and if not, then I would like, we aren't that many people in this audience, so I'd like each person to just at one person at a time, just unmute themselves and say one key takeaway that they have gotten from this session. So I'm going to go through the participant list, and I will call you out one at a time. So I hope you are all ready for that. Yeah, but just if you don't feel like you want to say anything in public, you can also write it in the chat. Just it doesn't have to be anything significant, just something that you found interesting or feel like you would take away from this session. So I'm going to start with Mosipo. I am not sure if your audio is present. I see you've not connected by audio, so maybe I will move on to Yamkela. Okay, I also see that there are a lot of people who have not been able to join consistently. Okay, so we have, is there any country that has less of an effect on climate change? So we covered this, but yes, I think, so many of our African countries have you know, the least impact on climate change. The small island developing states, I showed a picture at the beginning of Tuvalu, they really have contributed, you know, amongst the least. They're really small populations and they live on islands, so they also have very small regions to move through, and so their energy footprint is quite low, but they are being impacted the most by climate change in terms of the sea level rising and coming and covering their islands. So that was from Sizeka, who was actually next on my list. Then I have next on my list, actually, Wendy, if you want to come in and say something, you're welcome to, because you're actually next on my list. But yeah, maybe we go on to Sibabalo.
Sure, everyone is very shy this morning.
Yeah. Maybe I will actually turn off my video because now I'm feeling shy because no one is seeing it.
We're also wondering if there's anyone there.
Yeah.
People's saying Jan Kayla said he had trouble with his audio. How's it been? I mean, we're not we're just basically interested to hear what your thoughts are. Like, is this interesting, new to you? What would you like to see more of in this conversation?
Okay.
Lisa's unmuted herself. Would you like to say something?
Yes, I'm Pumeza from Spagamini Address Office. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm just looking at this presentation, but thank you, Claire, for this presentation. And then my interest is around climate change and rural action. And then we are already started to position ourselves in IDP processes, all those kind of stuffs. Ne? But I was looking at this. I was looking at information around renewable energies on farming, around farming, because we are surrounded by farmers. So I was checking what is it that we do for climate change around farming issues. And then I need maybe more capacity in those areas about irrigation systems, farmings, and crops that you can use around those issues. Because I was looking for resources and do something. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. We'll keep a note of that. And yeah, we're always interested to know what information you are interested in getting from this project. So yeah, around irrigation systems and crops that you can use. I've noted that down. So I think do we still have? Okay, so
yeah,
you go, Claire.
No, I'm just saying I do understand that because of the network issue, some people have been coming in and out, so they might not feel comfortable to like report because they feel like, oh, I missed the beginning and then I joined and then I cut out again. But thank you, Kumulani. I see that you said you'd missed some of the session, but that what was interesting was on the renewable energy is important for people that are living in rural areas. And indeed, it's so challenging. Like I think Wendy was saying it in her presentation at the start, that sometimes some municipalities will be pushing for non-renewable energy and they'll phrase it as development. So that if you as activists say to them, this is going to be damaging for the environment, then they will brand you as being anti-development and oh, you don't want people to have jobs. So that's a really tough place to come from, because of course nobody would be saying, no, we don't want jobs. What the vision is go with jobs, but make them in a renewable energy sector, not in fossil fuels.
Yeah, and just to add on to this is that I think unfortunately the problem is that when it comes to conversations around what is a just position and development, communities are not given the
the right to decide what development they want. And I think that's also what Wendy was saying, that it's like not up to you. Someone else is coming in and saying this is the kind of development that is the good kind of development and the only kind of development that is valid. And communities are not given the space to articulate what you want for your own. So if anyone else is online and would like to contribute, I think it would be nice to write it in the chat, and otherwise unmute yourself with your last sort of takeaway. But if not, then I think, can we all maybe turn on our cameras so that we can take a picture?